Hello, and welcome to another lesson from Level Up Mathematics. In today's lesson, we will be solving quadratic equations by the square root method. Now, in order to use the square root method, you must meet a couple of very important conditions. Number one, your equation must be in the form ax squared equals c. In other words, you're missing the b term. So if you had something like this, 4x squared plus 5x plus 7 equals 0, you could not use the square root method on that problem because it has a b term. The only time you could use the square root property when maybe it looked like this, 4x squared plus 7 equals 0. That's missing the b term, all right? The other time you can use the square root property is if you have a binomial squared. So x minus a squared is equal to a constant. If these two conditions are met, you can solve by the square root property. Now, the steps to solving by the square root property are isolate the x squared term. Step 2, take the square root of both sides of the equation. Step 3, simplify the radical if necessary. And step 4, check your solution. Now, let's do a couple of examples so you can see how these steps work in a problem. So in problem A, we have 3x squared minus 48 is equal to 0. So we can use the square root property on this problem because there's no bx term. So step 1, isolate the x squared. So we'll add 48 to both sides. So 3x squared, negative 48 and positive 48 would zero out. 0 plus 48 is 48. Now divide both sides by 3, and that would give us x squared equals 16. So that's step 1. Isolate the x squared on one side and the constant term on the other. Step 2 says to take the square root of both sides of the equation. So I'll take the square root of x squared and the square root of 16. So x equals, the square root of 16 is 4. Now there's one other thing you have to do, and you have to add plus or minus in front of your answer because there's two numbers you can square and get 16. So 4 squared will give me 16 and negative 4 squared will give me 16. So you need your plus or minus symbol. Now, as far as checking your solution, I'm going to use Desmos to check it. I'm not going to show the check step on paper. If your teacher requires it, then please show your check step. Now, the way you check it is you take your original equation, 3x squared minus 48, and you replace the x squared with parentheses. And in the parentheses, you put your answer you got. So we got positive 4 and then squared. So 3 times 4 squared minus 48. And that equals 0. So positive 4 checks out. Now we need to check negative 4. So put a negative on the 4, and that also equals 0. So our solution checks out, and we can box it in. X equals positive 4, and x equals negative 4. All right, problem B. 1/2 x squared minus 1 is, 1/2 x squared plus 1 is equal to 19. So step 1, isolate the x squared term. So we'll subtract 1 from both sides, and that will give us 1/2 x squared. This will zero out. 19 minus 1 is 18. All right, now, to undo this fraction, we're going to have to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1. So we'll multiply both sides by 2. 2 over 1 times 1/2 gives us 1x squared. And over here, 18 times 2 is 36. All right, so we've done step 1. We've isolated the radical. Step 2 is to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of x squared gives us x, and the square root of 36 is positive 6 or negative 6. So I'm going to put plus or minus 6. All right, now when I check this one in my calculator, I'm going to use 0.5 instead of 1/2 because it's easier to type in. So 0.5 parenthesis, I'll check my first solution, which was 6 squared plus 1, and that does give me 19. So positive 6 checks out. Now let's check negative 6. So change the positive 6 to negative 6, and it also equals 19. So both of those solutions check out. All right, problem C. We have 3x squared minus 14 is equal to 10. So we'll start out by adding 14 to both sides. So 3x squared would equal 24. Divide by both sides by 3. So 24 divided by 3 would give me 8. Take the square root of both sides. So x equals plus or minus. Now, square root of 8 is not a perfect square. So in cases like this, you must simplify it. So what we want to do is break down square root 8 into a perfect square factor. So square root of 8 could be rewritten as square root 4 times square root 2. And the square root of 4 is 2. So square root of 8 breaks down to plus or minus 2 square root 2. Now, that's kind of a weird answer, so before we box that in, we're going to check it. So I'll show you how you check it. You're going to type a 3 parenthesis 2 square root 2, and then you want a side arrow and put a parenthesis, and then squared, minus 14, and sure enough, it does equal 10. So the positive 2 square root of 2 is a solution. Now I'm going to change it to negative 2 square root of 2, and it also equals 10. So this answer checks out. All right, problem D. 4 minus 3x squared is equal to negative 77. So let's get the x squared by itself. So subtract 4 from both sides. So this would zero out and leave me negative 3x squared equals negative 81. Divide both sides by 3. So negative 81 divided by negative 3 is positive 27. Take the square root of both sides. So x will equal plus or minus. Now I'm going to come over here and simplify square root 27. Square root 27 will break down to square root 9 times square root 3. The square root of 9 is 3, so this would be 3 square root 3. Okay. Now let's check that answer. We have 4 minus 3 parenthesis 3 square root 3 side arrow close parenthesis squared, and that equals negative 77. So 3 square root 3 checks out. Now I'm going to check out negative 3 square root 3, and that also checks out. All right, pause the video and try problem E on your own. All right, welcome back. Let's see how you did. In step 1, I added 8, and that gave me 1/2 x squared is equal to 20. Then I multiplied both sides by the reciprocal. So 2 over 1 times 1/2 gives me 1x squared. 20 times 2 gives me 40. Then I took the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared is x, plus or minus. Now the square root of 40 will break down to square root 4 times square root 10, and the square root of 4 is 2. So plus or minus 2 square root 10. To check my answer, I used 0.5 parenthesis 2 square root 10 side arrow close parenthesis squared minus 8, and that equals 12. And then I checked the negative, and that also equals 12. All right, problem F. M squared minus 4 divided by 3 equals 7. Now, sometimes people get confused on what to do first on this problem. Because we have a fraction is equal to a whole number, I would start off by multiplying both sides of this by 3, the reciprocal. And the reason we're doing that is because this 3 will cancel with this 3, leaving me m squared minus 4 on the left side, and 7 times 3 equals 21 on the right side. Now add 4, so that gives me 25, and then take the square root. So m equals, now this is a perfect square, so plus or minus 5. Now we'll check our answer. So I need a fraction bar. And on top, I'm going to put parenthesis 5, parenthesis squared, minus 4. And on the bottom, I'm going to put a 3. And that equals 7, so that checks out. Now change that positive 5 to negative 5. And that also checks out. So our answers are positive 5 and negative 5. All right, now in example 3, let's talk about what to do when you have a binomial squared. So when we have a binomial squared, you're still starting out by trying to get the x squared term on its own. So in problem A, we have 2 times the quantity, x plus 1 squared, is equal to 98. So if I want to get this squared term by itself, I need to divide both sides by 2. So this 2 will cancel with this 2, leaving me x plus 1 parentheses squared. Over here, we have 49. All right, now we've got our binomial squared by itself. So we'll take the square root of this side and the square root of this side. So the square root of x plus 1 squared is simply x plus 1. Square root of 49 would be plus or minus 7. Now, we're going to subtract, to get the x by itself, I'll subtract 1 from both sides. So negative 1 plus or minus 7. So what we have is 2 problems here. X is equal to negative 1 plus 7, and x is equal to negative 1 minus 7. So here, negative 1 plus 7 would be 6. Negative 1 minus 7 would be negative 8. Now, to check these, we're going to come back to our original problem. 2, parenthesis, try my first answer, which was 6. 6 plus 1, parenthesis, squared, and that equals 98. Now, change that 6 to a negative 8. And that also checks out. So both of these solutions were correct. All right. Problem B, we have 1/2 times the quantity x minus 4 squared is equal to 50. So I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation by 2 before we even start. So 1/2 times 2 is just 1. So this is x minus 4 quantity squared is equal to 100. Now that you have your squared term isolated, take the square root of both sides. So that would be x minus 4 on this side. The square root of 100 would be plus or minus 10. Now move the negative 4 to the other side and make it positive 4, plus or minus 10. So x equals 4 plus 10, or x equals 4 minus 10. So my first solution is 14. My second solution is negative 6. I'm going to check that by putting in 0.5, parenthesis, 14 minus 4, parenthesis squared. That equals 50. Then I'll change the 14 to a negative 6, and that also checks out. So I can box both of these in. All right. Now, problem C, we have x squared plus 10x plus 25 is equal to 16. Now, in this problem, we do not have a parenthesis squared. However, we can factor x squared plus 10x plus 25 to x plus 5 times x plus 5. I can just rewrite it in its factored form, which x plus 5 times x plus 5 can also be rewritten as x plus 5 squared equals 16. So if we rewrite it like that, now we can solve by the square root property. So I'll take the square root of this side and the square root of this side. So that gives me x plus 5 equals plus or minus 4. Move the positive 5 to the other side, so negative 5 plus or minus 4. So x equals negative 5 plus 4. X equals negative 5 minus 4. So this would be negative 1. This would be negative 9. So let's check our solutions. We have parenthesis, whoops, I'm going to put parenthesis, negative 1 parenthesis squared plus 10 parenthesis negative 1 plus 25. And that does equal 16. Now change the negative 1 to negative 9. So change that to negative 9, that to negative 9, and it also checks out. So x equals negative 1, x equals negative 9. All right, problem D. X squared minus 16x plus 64 equals 36. Now I'm going to rewrite this in my factored form. So to get x squared, I would use x times x. To use 64, I would use minus 8 and minus 8. So that could be rewritten as x minus 8 quantity squared equals 36. Now square root both sides. So that would give me x minus 8 equals plus or minus 6. Add the 8 to both sides to get positive 8 plus or minus 6. So 8 plus 6 is 14. 8 minus 6, positive 2. So when I check it, parenthesis 14 parenthesis squared minus 16 parenthesis 14 plus 64, and that checks out. Now change the 14 to 2. And that also checks out. All right, example 4. The surface area of a cube can be found using the formula S equals 6s squared. Determine the length of each side of the cube if the surface area is 600 square meters. So the surface area of a cube is equal to 6 times the side square. Now all we know in this problem, let me highlight what we know, is that the surface area is 600. So I'm going to plug in a 600 for the capital S, the surface area. And what we're trying to do is solve for little s, the length of the side. Now, it may be easier if you rewrite it where the 6 little s squared is on the left and the 600 is on the right. It'll look more like the problems we did at the beginning. So I'll divide both sides by 6. So side squared is equal to 100. And then square root both sides. So our side length is 10. Now, I do not want to put my plus or minus here because when you're dealing with geometry problems, we cannot have a negative side length. And I also want to put my units, which was meters. So the side of this cube, each side is 10 meters. All right. Example 5. Jeremy dropped his hat from a bridge that is 256 feet above the ground. The equation below can be used to find the time it takes the hat to hit the ground. Solve the equation to determine the time it will take to hit the ground. So it may be helpful to you again to rewrite this in this form with our variables on the left side. So we will start off by subtracting the 256. So negative 16t squared equals negative 256. Now divide both sides by negative 16. So negative 256 divided by negative 16 gives us positive 16. So t squared equals positive 16. Now square root both sides. The square root of 16 is 4. And I'm not going to put plus or minus 4 because time must be positive. So this would be 4 seconds to hit the ground. And that concludes today's lesson, solving quadratic equations using the square root property.